You're listening to Mortgage 101. I'm Clinton Wilkins, and this is a special episode that we're going to recap the last year of the show. In May, we welcome Chief Credit Officer at Manulife Bank, Sandy Burns. She tells us about mortgage fraud and how our neighbors in the South are affecting us here in Canada. There's so many, bad players out there, and it must be just daunting from a bank perspective to make sure that the people that you're doing business with are people that you want to be doing business with.
Absolutely.
The reputational risk is just so high.
Yeah.
Like imagine if the bank does a mortgage and then there is some reputational risk. That can be tough because the bank doesn't want their name in the media saying, hey, we did these mortgages.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would think that if as times get more desperate financially for people, you're going to see people taking more risks.
Well, and so interestingly, we had higher interest rates, so we saw a spike in fraud for shelter.
Yeah.
Now with the uncertainty and everything that's going on with our partners in the South, we're definitely seeing the potential for more fraud coming potentially across the border as well. So I think there's never a time when we can say, oh, we're going to relax.
We're good,
There's no fraud.
We're just opening the floodgates here.
Yeah.
How strident are Canadian rules as opposed to American rules for this type of thing?
So I would say that we are heavily regulated, and we're grateful for that, I think is the best way to put it. In the States, you can have federal regulations, but then you also have state-driven regulations, and I don't think that it is as conservative or as heavily monitored. However, we have seen in the news quite a bit recently about anti-money laundering and things like that. So I would say we have good guidance and partners in the federal government that support us in the guidelines that we should have in place. But it is ever changing. They're using their minds for evil instead of good out there, and it is an ever-shifting landscape. Where we're seeing fraud coming in so many different ways that we always have to be reiterating and changing and making sure that we're covering ourselves.
And I think it's hard to manage that expectation from a consumer's perspective. Sometimes I see consumers be like, well, 20 years ago, I just basically got a mortgage with a handshake. I don't think that was true because I was doing it 20 years ago. We were doing it basically
maybe
the same.
40.
40 years ago, maybe, sure.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, whatever rules that lenders are putting into place, it's really to protect Canadians from themselves. Really, we want to make sure that this consumer can afford to make their mortgage payments. We don't want the bank to have a loss just as much as we don't want the consumer to have a loss. Buying a home is the biggest purchase of people's lives, and a mortgage is the biggest debt. We want to make sure that they can pay.
Yeah,
and that's why there's this due diligence.
It's so true. And as much as the guidance and regulations and everything else seems onerous, we want to make sure that the customer is not waking up in the middle of the night stressed about how am I going to make my next payment? What happens if I lose this property? That's the last thing that we want. And so we want to make sure we're providing the right solutions and that folks are in a mortgage that they are comfortable paying on a regular basis.
Do you see people sometimes, because sometimes there's multiple people applying for a mortgage or a couple or whatever it might be, whereas one of the partners is doing something fraudulent and the other is completely unaware of that?
That is a great question. I honestly don't know. Typically, if we see something fraudulent, then
They're both on board.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Because that could cause a real problem at home afterwards.
I would think so.
Politics were a hot topic this year and sparked tariff scares and tons of uncertainty. Back in May, we didn't know where things were headed, but we learned what red flags to look out for. We were talking during the break about Fraud Awareness Month, and it just passed in March. And it's such a topical subject right now. Obviously, as the economy is more challenging and as house prices increase, fraud is just such a forefront of what I do every day. And there's obviously different types of fraud. There's fraud for profit, fraud for shelter. And we never thought it impacted us here in Atlantic Canada. We would see maybe like one fraud file. And when we say fraud file, it's suspected fraud because it's not fraud until it's actually proven in court that it's fraud.
Right.
But we would see one file maybe a year. But it's certainly becoming more and more prevalent here in Atlantic Canada. And I know in Ontario and obviously in the West, it's just rampant, especially when it comes to mortgage lending. Sandy, what insights can you give us on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We saw a big spike in fraud for shelter when interest rates were high.
What's that mean, fraud for shelter?
So that means I'm trying to buy my house, and I can't quite qualify. So maybe I doctor up my income statement
I
in
see.
some way, shape, or form, or some bank
Yeah,
statement.
yeah.
So it's usually an individual or a very smaller scale.
Yeah. How often do you see that, by the way? Is that quite? I wouldn't think that's very common. Maybe it's more common than I think.
It is. I wouldn't say it's like an everyday thing, but it
Yeah.
is probably more common than you think.
What are some red flags for that?
So really good red flags. We ask the question, does it make sense? So if
You always hear about the cab driver making $200,000 a year.
you got it. You
Yeah,
got it. Yeah. And then the other piece is, do all the documents tell the same story? So we don't ask for just one piece of paper when you're, say, buying a house. There is your full purchase and sale agreement. There's proof of your down payment. There's proof of your current income. There's your credit bureau. There's, all of these pieces of
Taxation
paper.
information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we, if we're reviewing these all together, you can start to cobble together a story. And when I led an underwriting team, I always tell them, if your spidey senses are tingling, chances are something's
Something's up.
up, right?
So you're saying that people will actually doctor, like Photoshop or whatever documents?
They can get pretty high tech with it.
Is
yes.
that right?
Yeah.
What percent? And you may or may not want to answer this. Gets sneaks one by.
I don't know that.
Yeah.
Because,
I mean, you don't know, I guess, unless there's a loss.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is. I would say fraud for shelter. No, all fraud is wrong.
Yeah.
Where you,
And illegal, like you could go to jail.
It is 100% illegal.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Where we have an additional challenge is when you have fraud rings. So you mentioned
Right.
fraud for profit, and that's when it gets really scary, because then it's not just a one-off mortgage. Then it's probably a group of mortgages, and you can be looking at millions and millions of dollars that are at risk.
So what type of organization would be orchestrating fraud for profit?
Organized crime?
Organized
No,
crime.
but
yeah.
I mean, is it like, just give me any tangibly? Is it a group or is it?
I think there has
It's
to be
usually a
multiple
group.
bad players involved.
That's right.
Sometimes there could be a mortgage broker, appraiser, lawyer, realtors. It's not just one person creating
Yeah.
these frauds, especially if we're talking about something to that scale. There would need to be multiple players involved
Yeah.
to kind of pull something
Yeah.
like that off.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes we see files coming from out of province and from clients we don't know, or brokers are trying to refer to us that we don't know, and we don't do that. Specifically because I want to know who the customer is, and we're really about that advice piece. But I'm sure it happens all the time.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
you're like, oh, here's a full package of documents. Well, why is the client not calling me directly? It just ask more and more questions.
That's it. The other one is if it's a rush.
Especially we see these ones are closing in 10 days.
Right. And it's
Like, why?
but the purchase agreement may have been signed like 3 months ago or something. And you're like, well, why all of a sudden is it a rush? Did
Yeah.
you really sign a purchase agreement without any conditions
Yeah.
and no financing in place?
I doubt it.
And so then you start to ask a few more questions.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how bad does the fraud get? Do people actually try and make up jobs?
You can see just about anything.
Yeah.
The most typical is, altering
A little bit.
a little
It's
bit.
usually either income or down payment, I
You
find.
got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
down payment is usually the most common, and then income for qualifying
Well, at some point though,
purposes.
you're going to have to justify that. You're going to have to pony up with the down
Well,
payment though.
if you're if you're misrepresenting, we'll call it misrepresenting instead of fraud. But if you're misrepresenting the down payment, but maybe that down payment's actually coming from proceeds of crime.
Oh, I see.
They're trying to legitimize
see.
the down
I see.
payment
Yeah.
and then washing the money to try
Yeah.
to make the down payment. It's
You got it.
very, very common.
All right. So what are the rules when it comes to down payment? Because you and I had a conversation. There are some government programs that will assist in down payment. There are lots of lots of avenues for down payments. So what are some of the rules for down payment?
Well, the money has to be in a Canadian financial institution, and it has to have passed kind of all the anti-money laundering rules. So it goes through a suspicious transaction with FinTrack, whatever financial institution it's with. They're going to verify those funds, and so we typically like to see it sitting in a bank account for like 90 days, a Canadian bank account. If it's a gift letter,
Yeah.
it has to be from an immediate family member. And the mortgage insurers out there, the default insurers, they define immediate family a little bit differently, but usually it's someone like your mom or dad or
Brother,
or
sister.
Brother, sister, exactly right. And it has to be an actual gift. So you can't have to pay me back after 3 months or something.
Because just imagine if the gift is not a gift and it's actually a loan, that actually worsens your financial position where maybe you have to make a payment on this. And I see this all the time.
Well, how would you police that, though? Police might not be the right term, but how do you monitor that? Because if somebody has a side deal, then you don't know, right?
The big challenge is, so we have our gift letter, and the gift letter clearly, explicitly says this is a gift.
Yeah.
If at the end of the day they're like sliding something behind it.
Yeah, that's they're going to have to deal with that as well. They're not helping themselves.
They're not helping.
Well, and this is why lenders. Moving into June, the Bank of Canada was holding steady. We welcomed our guest, Trevor Gordon, to highlight chip reverse mortgages and talk a little bit about the bank of mom and dad.
And Trevor, before the break, you were talking about your own personal experience, and I just wanted to give you a chance to finish that up because I think it's important.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Yeah. So what I was saying, I finally appreciate that much more when a client says, I don't want to leave the home, and I just want this money for care.
Right.
And we do a lot of those across the country. Because aging in place is so important. And
that has such a value, I think. And I think people potentially, I don't know if this is true or not, but they might live longer if they can be in their own home.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no
more
question.
will to live, maybe. Joie de vie.
Absolutely. And it's all in our environment. It's like, I know where everything is. I know where the store is. I know who the neighbors are.
Right.
And aging in place is very, very important.
But being able to pay for somebody to clear the driveway and mow the lawn and take care of the garden that you love is important.
Absolutely.
Or maybe even doing renovations of the home to be able to stay in the home.
Exactly. That's right.
Absolutely. And I'm actually seeing more now of the children saying to their parents, listen, mom and dad, I can't be continuing to come to cut the grass, and I'm
they're getting older.
Kids,
they're getting older.
Or they're getting older as well.
Yeah.
So this allows them to hire somebody to come in and do that work for them.
What I'm seeing a lot, Trevor, is people wanting to get into the housing market and parents and grandparents really helping first-time home buyers getting in. And a lot of these kids, and you call them kids, but they're adults, need big gifts to be able to get into the housing market, because of their income and the cost of housing. I'm seeing a lot of six-figure gifts, and I read something the other day. The average gift now for a first-time home buyer to get into the housing market is something like $106,000.
Yep. So it's bank of mom and dad.
Yep.
And in the Toronto, Vancouver markets, it's almost impossible for somebody to get in there.
They don't just need $100,000; they need $500,000 or $1 million maybe to get in.
Exactly. So bank of mom and dad is a common use. Again, helping with down payments, early inheritance. What I've seen a lot of here is actually mom and dad helping out through a separation or divorce.
Right. I never thought about that one.
Yeah. And I think, honestly,
it's almost like they're getting their inheritance now versus later type thing.
And I think that's more for the grandkids.
Let's keep them in the house.
Nanny and grandpa want to make sure the grandkids are just down the street still.
Right.
And they're going to do what's necessary to help in this situation.
But they can't swing at a big payment.
Exactly.
If you've liked what you've heard and you want to learn more, feel free to visit us online at teamclinton.ca.